Hello, friends, and everyone out in Momentum Land. Welcome to the Momentum Boost. I'm your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, and I'm truly grateful that you're with us here today. So, if you're new here in this platform, just feel free to explore the whole layout. And if you want to ask our guests a question, you just click the question mark in the lower left hand side of the chat box. But know that the questions can be seen by everyone. So, if you wanted anonymity, you just click the hand icon, okay? Tremendous. So this week is Inclusion Week. All of our boosts have been done in partnership with the Ruderman Foundation, and we're very happy to be providing closed captioning. So if you'd like to use it, just click on the link in the chat pod and then follow along with us. Today, we're turning to two parents whose children have special needs, and we want to learn about their daily lives and hear what they wish we as other parents really knew so that we can empathize and take action appropriately and create a really supportive community. Our first guest, Ruchi Koval, is a momentum trip leader, and she's a motivational speaker who has mentored educators and self-development groups for over 2 decades. She is the author of Conversations with God, and Ruchi currently serves as the Associate Director at Congregation JFX, which she co-founded. Jeff Singer is a devoted advocate for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Jeff has served as a board member of Shane's Inspiration, and he's deeply connected to ETA, which enables people with disabilities to live fully enriched, independent, and active lives. Please join me in welcoming Ruchi and Jeff.
Thank you so
Adrienne.
much.
It's a pleasure.
It's great to be here.
I'm delighted that you could come, and I'm grateful that you're willing to share your truths with us, because so many of us who see parents and situations and families where there's a child with disabilities feel that we don't know how to move forward. We don't know what to say because we don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't understand the inside of your world, and we need to. In order for things to move along, for us to all operate together, it takes a village, obviously. So my very first question is going to be personal. I want to go in this direction first, if I may. I want to know how having a special needs child impacts family life. For example, your marriage or relationship with siblings. And then as an extension of that, how can extended family and friends be of assistance to you? Ruchi, you want to begin?
Sure. So in sum, it's extremely taxing and extremely stressful. I mean, we know that maintaining a marriage takes a lot of work in the best of circumstances. When there's a special needs child, there's a lot going on that puts extra stress on the marriage. Firstly, each member of the couple grieves differently, and there is most definitely a grieving process, both in the beginning, but all along the way, as your child reaches certain milestones that their peers are reaching. And there's always a comparison. There's like fresh grief over what's different. And so people grieve differently. Very often there's differences in how to handle the child's care, how to be emotionally, how much to reveal to others, how private to be. And all of this can put a lot of strain on the relationship. And it really, really has to be worked on very actively, unconsciously, because the child's welfare has to be at the forefront. And the last thing a special needs kid needs is their parents' marriage in disarray. In terms of extended family, my husband and I both come from, thank God, large families. We each have lots of siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, the works. And I have to say that it's a deeply lonely process because you suddenly feel very different from your family members. And you're not always sharing everything with everybody. It depends on the nature of the disability. It depends on what the child wants to share, depending on how old they are. It depends on your relationships with your extended family members, whether there's often a fear that you won't be supported or that people will say hurtful things or misunderstand the way you're handling it. And so sometimes the adults retreat into their shells and choose not to share, and that builds more walls. Not to say that isn't the best decision sometimes. So in terms of family life, like, again, thank God we have 7 kids, and the siblings can really resent their sibling. They can really resent the special needs sibling for all the stress they put, all the havoc they cause, all the money and attention they're draining away. And so there has to be, again, this just puts more stress on the parents, but there has to be a really concerted decision to not neglect the typical kids in your quest to be the most advocative parent for the special needs kid. So there's a lot of potential for stress. And if you go into it with your eyes wide open and with a lot of support, they can be navigated. But there are going to be some days that are truly horrific.
Wow. So, in the whole land of he said, she said, Jeff, I imagine that the experience of the mother and the father in these situations is the same and different. But tell me about what Ruchi said. Does that resonate for you? And how would you answer that question from the point of view of the father?
Well, Ruchi definitely had a lot to say, and I can relate to so much of it. I would tell you that my daughter Sophie's 20 years old, so we've spent the last 20 years dealing with this, and it's a growing process. I think when we first started out, there were so many unknowns, and we had a lot, from day one when Sophie was diagnosed with her issues, we had no idea where she would be. So I think the focus from day one for us was whatever we could do for her up front, whatever therapies, whatever involvement, whatever programs, we gave as much earlier intervention as possible.
Right.
Because the focus had to be, let's give her everything she can have so she can achieve whatever goals that she's capable of achieving. How this all affected marriage and family, there's many aspects of it. I think for a woman, it's different than from a man. I think for my wife, Kelly, it was much more difficult in the sense that she worried about what all the things that may not be, where I tried to focus as a man on fixing things and figuring out what could be. And I think it was just a different mindset. And what we definitely realized very early on in the process, that the most important thing was to work together. Marriage is difficult in the best of times. So when you have a child with issues, the most important thing is work together, grow together, solve issues and solve problems, and find the good in everything you can. Because if the marriage is strong, the family is strong. And that was always my focus and always my wife's focus. And obviously, with 2 other daughters who were typical, one was older and one was Sophie's twin, and we had to support them as well during the entire process. So it's, as Ruthie said, there's so many different aspects of it, but I think definitely from my perspective as a man, it was about what can I do to fix things and keep things moving in a positive way and try not to be as emotional, because my wife was better at that.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that, and actually I'd like to take that a little bit further. What happens when and I would say that in general, that is a typical male-female response, but it's not always the case. But when both parents have different coping mechanisms, how do you come to a place where you have a family plan? Or, it's hard enough to have a divided, a unified front in front of the children at the best of times. So what about the feelings of resentment when your partner is not giving you the kind of support that you perhaps were looking for? Maybe you need a period where you can obsess and worry and have them listen and not want to fix. And the flip side is, there might be times where you would say, well, stop dwelling. I really want to be proactive about that. How did you come to manage those diverging ways?
It's a great question. And over a 20-year process, I'm sure there were many ways we dealt with it. Logically, I tried to be as supportive of my wife as I could and supportive of my kids as I could. I always tried to find the good and always focused on the positive. I think at times, like I said, she was more emotional dealing with the fear aspect. And I think just supporting her and supporting Sophie and supporting my other 2 daughters and always having a positive view of what the future was going to bring really was probably the most effective use of who I was and who I could be.
So, that's an internal thing. Ruchi, I'm curious about, when you're dealing with a whole family, you're also dealing with the way the siblings relate. And you said that they can feel resentful from time to time. Was there any language that you found particularly useful to help your other siblings, you know, not be repeatedly saying this isn't fair?
Yeah. So a lot of it was education. Like it was almost not fair because we were going to all this therapy and I joined a support group. I'm a very support groupy person. And
Right.
now, to be fair, my husband did not join a support group. I was his support group. So that's a whole other dynamic. But like I had to remember that I had to share the wisdom and support that I was getting and bring that to my kids. They weren't getting it from anywhere else.
Ah.
And even though I tried to create support groups for siblings, but most tweens and teens do not want to be in support groups. They don't want to talk to strangers about their issues. I mean, plenty of adults don't either.
Right.
So I had to share the wisdom that I was receiving from my self-education with my kids. We also created something called special time, with which my kids now totally roll their eyes at and think that's the corniest phrase ever invented. But, once a week, I would try to connect with each one of my other kids and just go out for pizza, go for a walk, watch their favorite show together. Because I had all this built-in special time with my special needs son because we were going to all these therapies and we were doing all these things and, getting him all these, toys and games. So, and then I also had special time with my husband. Like sometimes we would go for a walk. My husband and me and my kids would say, "Oh, can we come along?" And I would be like, "No, I'm having special time with dad now." So, and sometimes I need special time with myself.
Right.
But, so it's both. It's the educating the kids and also teaching them with your actions that you don't have to have a disability in order to get special time with your parent.
Wow. That's a very wise response. I like that, special time, or whatever your language might be. I'm curious from both of you. One of the milestones that parents of typical children watch are friendships, relationships outside of the familial relationships. And we want that for our children, but I would imagine that in a situation where a child has particular needs outside of the typical day-to-day socializing that kids might do, was there barriers within the family or within the community to your children having friends? And what do those barriers look like? And how can we be friends to both your family and to your children who need that friendship?
That's a really good question, Adrian. I will tell you, when Sophie was young, because she was a twin, in some ways, Sophie, it was really nice because Sophie was always included with her friends and with Riley's friends. And it was great when she was young because there wasn't that much of a difference. But as she got older, I think it was an adjustment period, not only for Sophie and Riley, but also for us, because what we realized is Sophie needed to be involved in activities with other kids with special needs because she felt more comfortable and she was more connected with kids that had similar issues. And I think it took us a while as parents to understand that, but it also took our friends to understand that too, because in most situations we had really compassionate friends, and almost every time Riley was invited to a birthday party, Sophie was included. It was really nice. The community really wrapped their arms around Sophie and really were good to her. But it took us a while to realize that she really fit in with her own group. And I think as she got older, that's what tended to happen. And as far as her siblings, both Riley and Emily, adore their sister, and I think we're always loving and supportive. But I think there's always some underlying resentment and issues, especially for a twin sister,
Sure.
where she may feel responsibility opposed to freedom. And there were always issues that I think that were underlying and probably came out later in her life, in her teens and her, middle school years. But that's just part of the process. It's part of what you get used to and how you deal with things.
Mm-hmm. What can you add to that, Ruch?
Well, first of all, just that's so beautifully said, Jeff, but I think it's also pretty amazing what we can get used to. When if I think of myself from 10 years ago, and my son is 13 and he has high functioning autism. If I would have peered into the future in 10 years, I would have been like, oh, no, I can't do that. But you just get used to certain things, and God gives you the strength you need, you know, in the moment to do things you never thought you could do and probably still can't believe you're doing. I will add to that, in many ways, our story is the opposite of yours because our son has high functioning autism. And in the early years, when he was first diagnosed at 7, he was extremely impaired. He could not be in school. It was just extremely debilitating. And now he's really gotten much more mainstreamed in terms of his psychological, social, and emotional development. But making friends is still tough. And I will say it bothers us more than it bothers him. A lot of times people with autism don't need those friends as much as we think they do, or in the same way that we do. They definitely need to be included. I completely agree with you on that. You know, and in the beginning, we tried to send our son to special needs events through the friendship circle and things like that. And this is tough sometimes with kids who have high functioning autism, he would look around at the group and be like, I don't belong here. This is not the place for me, you know, and he would sometimes tell us this place is too autistic for me. And like, but, you know, and I will say too, Jeff, I had a similar experience in terms of the community being amazing. Even after he left his Jewish day school to be in a therapy center full time and later in public school, they kept inviting him to their events, inviting him to the bar mitzvahs. It was, I mean, I could almost cry. It was so heartwarming. But still, you know, he's back at day school. Thank God. He still comes home from school and doesn't play with anybody. And it's not that people don't want to be friends with him. It's that he doesn't know how or want. I'm not even sure what it is. And so it makes my heart go ouchie, but it just is. It really just is. If I could tell the community one thing, I would just say, just keep inviting. Whatever the parents decide, whatever the child feels comfortable, just let them always know that they were considered and included. You can never go wrong with that.
Let me add to that because I think it's important because Ruti, Sophie's on the different extreme. Sophie loves people and wants to be included. So the hard part for us was when she was lonely. She's kind of like me. I like to be around friends. I like to be around people all the time. And the hardest part was when she would say, Mom, Dad, I don't have a lot of friends, or I don't like to hang out with this one as much because they don't talk as much. So finding her friends was so important and so difficult at certain points, but she happens to be so social. So you could tell the range from some kids don't really need to be that social and some need really to be social. So it just shows the range. Kids with special needs can go from one extreme to the other, and their needs are the ones that we have to figure out how to fulfill, because the socialization aspect can be really important when they're not getting enough or when they don't need that much.
You know,
Yeah.
you're saying something right now that's hitting on me. What you're saying is probably a key piece here, in that we tend to see people with disabilities as this one entity, as opposed to recognizing that every individual, regardless of their ability, have particular needs. Their souls have particular needs. So I would say that a first tool to take away is to look at the individual as opposed to focusing on the disability. So that's number one.
Absolutely.
I would like you to give me a little practical thoughts that we, as your neighbors, as your friend, as your co-congregants, as your community, can do to ease for you. What can we do? What would you wish that you could say to us? Help me with this, do this. Stop saying, is there anything I can do? Just tell me what would help.
Well, one thing I would say, Adrian, and this kind of continues from what Jeff was saying, is that I think a lot of times kids with special needs, we kind of put the onus on the kids, on the peers, right? Like invite them to your birthday party. But I think adults, particularly with my son, because he relates more to adults than to kids his own age, and that's not uncommon with high functioning autism, is that when you see, you know, a kid around and you just say, hey, you know, hey, how are you? And you kind of just have to take their cues. Do they want to talk to you? Do they not want to talk to you? But just, you can be that adult in their life. It doesn't just have to be the kids who have to include the kids. You know, any adult who would say to my kid, hey, you know, where are you going to school these days? Or your dog is really cute. And then just kind of read their signals. I'll also say that one of the things that I found so important, because sometimes I found that people reached out to me, and Jeff, I don't know if you got this as much as a guy, but for sure with women, it was like, oh my gosh, did you try this gluten-free diet? Did you try these essential oils? You know, did you try rubbing mint in your head or what have you? You know, which I didn't appreciate any of that. But when people said to me, how can I support you? I'm again, I could just cry thinking about like when someone said those words to me, and it was like, I want to support you. I'm looking to you as the expert for how I can support you. And I genuinely want to know. It's not a if there's anything I can do. Just it's that simple, how can I support you? It's just everything. That's everything.
I want to add to that, Adrian.
Please.
I think something that's so important for people to look at from the outside in, and really focus on the abilities of the child, not the disabilities of the child, because every one of these kids has abilities. Some are more, some are different. But if people can understand that to focus on the abilities of these kids and their interests, and not necessarily try to fix them or fix us, but just like Ruthie said, be supportive and focus on the abilities and engagement and strength. That goes such a long way with not only the kids, but also the families.
I think you're right. I think it's true of typical children and adults as well, is that when we overfocus on the dis as opposed to the able, we create a culture of negativity. Someone just wrote in a question, can you talk about any barriers and any advice that you can give for the Jewish communities and for the schools, the Hebrew schools, the day schools? As a community, I have a family member who's autistic, and I remember one day him bringing him to synagogue and him hiding in the cloakroom in the corner, and people were coming in and attempting to get him to come out, and it became this whole kerfuffle. And then one woman who works specifically with children on the spectrum came in, and he was out within 2 seconds. She knew what to do, but there were things that people were doing wrong. What kind of stupid comments? What goes on that if you could fix it like this, you would want that to happen?
I mean, we've heard a lot of stupid comments in our time, especially when Sophie was little. Some of the things that people said would blow your mind. And unfortunately for Kelly, she heard it a lot because she would be with Sophie when people would say things like that. And it's mind blowing. But I tended not to focus on that because probably I didn't see any positivity in focusing on that. And if somebody would have said things to me that they said to Kelly, it probably wouldn't have been very pretty, but I didn't see a lot of that. So I'm going to defer to Ruti.
Okay, Ruch, what do you think?
I think that when we talk about kids with disabilities, like, Jeff and I share a similar disability, it's autism, but even within our two stories, there's such a huge range. I mean, when you expand that to kids with physical disabilities, kids with cognitive delays, there's so much. And I think probably the best thing to do is for the synagogue or the JCC or the school to contact the parents and say, again, how can we support you through this? What can we do to make our school or our synagogue inclusive of your child? Because nobody knows better than the parents what their particular kid needs. There's no real rules because every kid is so different. People sometimes assume that kids with autism are savants or they're geniuses or they have, photographic memories. There are some stereotypes floating out there because of TV and books and movies, which always dramatize everything. And so a lot of those things are not necessarily true. And also kids with special needs, their lives change as the years go by. I remember reading a story of a woman living in Israel whose son was disabled in the Israeli army, and he couldn't participate in Simchat Torah at synagogue because the one accessible entrance, they had moved all the tables away and they had unwittingly blocked the one accessible entrance. Now, anybody can be guilty of that. That's a mistake. But if you have a good relationship with the parents, and us as parents, I also think we have to try to be non-hysterical, as much as it hurts us, they didn't do it on purpose. They don't hate your kid, and, you just have to say, look, you probably didn't realize, but my child is unable to get through this. And it's hard to be non-reactive because you have such a gaping wound, and every time it gets stepped on, it bleeds. And so it's hard not to get angry that the school can't meet your needs or that the synagogue doesn't have, an upgraded bima with, wheelchair accessibility. It's easy to feel like the world is conspired against your child, but that's just not necessarily true. I do feel like my kids' day school tried their hardest to meet my son's needs. They couldn't. And so we pulled him out, but literally like with no resentment. Day schools, it is so expensive to give kids a Jewish education, and it is so expensive to meet kids' needs that are different. And so I really do believe they tried their hardest, and I did advocate for him and I did do my best. And that's what the community has to do. How can I support you through this? And if you can't afford it or you don't know how, you could say, we're trying to the maximum of our ability. Your child is an important part of our community. We will do the best we can to let your child know that she is just as important and valued member of our school community, synagogue community, as any other child, because they have a Jewish soul just like everybody else. And even if it seems like they can't relate necessarily on the intellectual level or on the emotional level, they're responding on a soul level, and that never goes away.
Let me say something. So Ruti, actually, Sophie's not autistic. So that's
I'm
actually
sorry,
a good,
I misunderstood.
no, it's fine, but it's a good example because Ruti hasn't met my daughter, Sophie, but there's lots of different types of disabilities, and each kid has a different issue, whether it's autism or many other issues. So I think the most important thing, whether it's about school or just from early intervention, we have to be tremendous advocates for our children. The school system, whether it's public, Jewish school, any Regency Center, nothing will do enough. We have to plow through. I was like a bull in a china shop. No matter what Sophie needed, she was going to get, and nobody could tell me no. And it's still to this point, they don't tell me no. Because if they tell me no, I'm going to go through them. I'm going to go around them. I'm going to figure out what she needs, and she's going to get whatever services she needs, whether it's through the regional center, whether I'm paying for it myself, whatever it was. And that early intervention, that strong advocacy works, because as they get older, everything you do when they're young pays off in spades. They become so much more complete for them and achieve so many more goals by continuing to do whatever needs to be done. I will tell you this, these kids have to be the hardest working kids around because they don't know any differently. And whether it was physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, VIP softball, baseball, basketball, this, whatever it was, Sophie participated and she wanted to, and she loved it. And she, to this day, is the hardest working kid I know, or young adult, I should say.
Okay. Oh, wow. I look forward to meeting her one day, please God. I'm going to ask you a question that is heavy. Over the years, I have heard people say, why me? Why us? What kind of God does this? It's not fair. What do you say to yourself spiritually, emotionally, to answer that question that so many people trot out when they're trying to square all the squares and close all the circles about what they think a linear life looks like?
I'll go first.
Please.
I got to be honest. I've never looked in the mirror and said, why me? I've never gone there. I've refused to do it because Sophie's been such a blessing in our family, and we've learned so much from her. I can't even explain. We are different people because of her and because of her challenges. We've seen and all the growth that we've seen in her, our lives are so much richer. Doesn't mean it wasn't difficult. Doesn't mean there weren't times where we struggled and we worried, because there were. I just never felt anything positive or anything good coming from looking in the mirror and asking why me, because it wasn't about me. It was about her, and it was about giving her everything she needed and giving our family every opportunity to grow and bond and have a wonderful life. And we have that, and I feel blessed.
You are blessed. You are a blessing too. Ruchi, what about you?
So while I completely agree with Jeff that having a special needs child has totally transformed us and our family ultimately for the better, even the siblings that I mentioned earlier, my daughter is going into psychology right now. She's going to be a school psychologist, largely because of having a special needs brother. And I think she'll be a pretty darn good one because of what she knows. But I have said, why me? I'm not as holy as you, Jeff.
No, okay. I'm sure you're much more.
I've asked it many times. And because our son is not the only parenting difficulty that we've had, we also have mental illness in our family. And my husband and I once went to a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Brittany. He lives in New York, and he was visiting here in Cleveland. And we asked him that question. We said, why us? Why is God picking on us? We try so hard to be good people. And he said that from a spiritual perspective, that God sometimes puts souls in this world to travel a difficult journey and to travel the scenic route to get to the destination that they need to get to. And that God searched the whole world for a set of parents that would be what this child needs. And he could find no better parents than my husband and me. And to me, that completely changed the paradigm from looking like we somehow missed the boat, as opposed to we are totally on track for exactly where we need to be. And moreover, this child's soul needs us, and that has really helped us stretch to meet the challenge. And because, you know, this kid is depending on us. What else do they have? They can't navigate their own world. They have difficulties, and they also have tremendous strengths, but they need us parents to, as you were saying, advocate and be there for them and pray for them and create a family atmosphere in which they're going to flourish. So I do still have my moments where I'm like, God, why does it have to be so hard? But overall, my philosophy is much more like I am on the front line of God's army because these kids need us so badly. And honestly, I'm privileged to be one of them.
Let me just add one more thing.
Please.
Charlie Harari, who's my dear friend and mentor, told me this a while ago, that Sophie was brought here to teach us, and her issues, really, we've learned so much from her that she's the blessing in our lives that have given us so much strength and so much love and so much feeling complete that, like Ruthie said, it's been difficult. There's been some very difficult times, but the rewards have been amazing.
Well, I hope it gives you both a lot of pleasure to hear what I just got in the chat. Somebody wrote in, I have felt so alone in all of this, and I'm in tears just hearing you validate what I've been living. Thank you so much. And I think she speaks for all of us. I really do. And wanting to thank you, wanting to tell you how much we appreciate your incredible transparency, your vulnerability, and your honesty, and just for sharing your time and insights with us. Thank you, Ruchi and Jeff, so much.